Hey folks, it's Professor Diffley. This is Philosophy 201, Ethics in the Modern World. This is Module 6, Lecture Video 2. So we left off talking about the dominion-based justifications. Now we're going to look at some of the critiques, the problems with this. So what is the biggest one? Religious diversity. Which religion or God is right? How do we even know that, right? So, say one religion says, you shouldn't eat beef, but others say you can. So who's right, right? So it really comes down to which God, religion, which means that if there's multiple different types of gods and religions out there, then there's no one true answer to this. So it's really hard to base it off this, for as a justification. Then what about non-believers, right? Not everybody's religious, so these justifications will not appeal, and even the secular one may appeal, but it may not. So that's an issue here. So you could really do this, and if you go back to Thomas Aquinas, that chapter and module, and covered some of these of the idea of like God commands it, so the God commands. But just because God commands it, does that makes it right? There are problems with that, so you can go back and review those arguments too back there. And this is it too. Just because something is loud does not mean it's desirable or good, right? So it might be allowed, but doesn't make it right, or really what you want to do. So this goes to the next one. Intellectual consistency, or really here, inconsistency. Religious texts often contain laws that no one reasonably follows today. So what allows someone to pick and choose the religious laws if they follow? If we follow one, shouldn't we follow them all? I mean, that's really the argument here. It's, you see the same, let's tie it to another thing. You see the same with, some people's arguments against getting a COVID vaccine, as they'll say, even though they're anti-vax, but they've gotten all these other vaccines in their life, or some have argued, and some Catholics and others have argued, well, it was based on stem cells. Okay, if that's your belief, then well, you shouldn't take Tylenol, you shouldn't take most medicines that were also developed at some point there. But so you're picking and choosing. It's intellectually inconsistent. And it's it's not really getting at the heart of it, but that's a problem, right? So many would argue if we're going to follow one rule, we really need to follow them all. And why? Often what you see is people picking the things that support their worldview most, rather than critically thinking it. But that's beside the point. So, really the problems with these first two ones, to get them out of the way, is these are not what you should be relying on. I mean, if you really want to, you can try to argue it. Again, there's no real right or wrong answers. Yes, you can eat animals. No, you can't. Really looking at how you make the arguments, back it up, that sort of thing. And so, but I, caution you against using dominion-based ones here. So let's look at these three main ethical schools and the permissibility of eating animals. Again, utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, which is deontology, and virtue ethics. So let's first look at utilitarianism and eating there. So, again, we're going to look at act utilitarianism here, but you also in your paper should cover rule utilitarianism. So, this goes back to Bentham. Again, when I mentioned Bentham, but I want to go into this, definitely look at the notes here, which goes into this. Some of it taken from the text. I switch over to it there. Bentham views this as, you can eat animals, but there is some caveats to that, and so you need to look at that. But, the way he looks at it this way is just, and this goes against the dominion thing, right? We see, or it could even be considered speciesism, which is actually a term, the actual term. Now, what it's saying here is that today we don't see animals as having rights, but, as equal to humans, but that may change in the future. Just look at this, and Bentham used a great example of this, two of them. at the point, this is where the French had already outlawed slavery. But the argument, used to be is that, Africans, because of their skin color, were not considered equal humans, or, they were, and were enslavable, or, perceived to be enslavable. But that has changed, right? So if skin color is not a reasonable and acceptable justification for doing something. Should it be that the animals have differences? So again, these outward things. Should that really be the reason? Because these could change. For Bentham, really, what this came down to was and let me go back to the slides there for you. So, the principle equal consideration more and morally relevant beings. Again, go back to the chapter on this to brush up on that if you want. But really, what this is getting to is principle equal consideration says that every human's interest and they need to be looked at equally, right? So a monarch views are not weighted more than an everyday person. So that's it. So the equal consideration for all views, and what are morally relevant beings, right? So who should we include, when we're determining the ethics of something is, how does it impact morally relevant beings? So one view of this would be like an ant is not a morally relevant being. So if you step on an ant as you're walking, so what, right? That's an ant. That's sort of the view. But the question then, are animals entitled to equal consideration? Are they morally relevant beings for our purposes? And if so, on what grounds? Most people said, what separates humans, right, is we're more advanced. We can reason, we can think, we can speak. Bentham says that's not relevant, and that's been played out and panned out actually in the sciences for animals. They've discovered that dolphins, their calls change. They actually name each other, right? Just because we can't. They don't speak our languages. Doesn't mean they don't communicate. So, that's not the argument they're going for. So what he's saying is, can they feel pain? Right? So remember, utilitarianism is all about maximizing pleasure, and avoiding pain. The greatest happiness versus, that's the goal. So, can animals feel pain? Well, yes, they clearly can, right? Animals can feel pain. So if an animal's pain is considering under what circumstances would meat eating be permissible, and under which would it be not, right? So that's the view. We need to ask: can the animal feel pain? If yes, then we need to determine when meat eating would be permissible and when it would not, right? So, but Bentham is arguing that it is permissible. It is permissible in certain settings. As something, again, look at the notes. I want to show you these again. For Benthamites, it's all suffering creatures, human or not, are part of the morally relevant beings. That we're assuming animals here then. But remind ourselves that it's utilitarianism is not looking at not being able to say everything. It's always right or always wrong there. So it may be morally acceptable, but in certain situations, right? Because we got to look at it that way. So one of the examples there is a scientist is close to curing cancer, but for somehow curing cancer, he needs to eat a healthy dog to do it. Oh, he needs to survive long enough to pass his research on. So this is sort of like what I was saying before with the cannibalism in the first video. Is right? We wouldn't want to eat humans, but sometimes it might be necessary in a very, very outrageous situation here. So then, there are other things to consider in this. Eating a turkey burger, or any burger cheaply with a lot of suffering may not be justifiable because, the suffering of the animal could have been avoided or lessened rather than factory farmed. It's really, really, that's the view on this one. It's going to depend on the act around it. So really take that into consideration as you look at that. I go more into it in the text there as well. Going back to this, now let's look at preference utilitarianism. And this is Peter Singer. And this is really where you should watch the video on this, because he really goes through his views on this and the arguments for it. It mirrors some of what's in the book. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. But it really comes down to is Singer argues that, what we need to do is be not cruel to animals, right? We should avoid factory farms. So what he's saying is that the ways in which the animal was raised, lived, and slaughtered matters. And this is one of his arguments. His quotes here. These arguments relating to the moral relevance of pains afflicting animals apply to animals that have been reared in factory farms, which means that we should not eat chicken, pork, veal unless we know that the meat we are eating was not produced by a factory farm. Why not a factory farm? Because, if you've ever seen the images or videos of all these animals, just pressed in against each other, it's not really, it's got to be like torture. It's unsanitary. It's not good for the animals, not good for us, but it's good for profits. The money for the company, that sort of thing. So what he's arguing here is that, yes, we need to consider that. So, if you're going to eat a chicken or eggs, you should go with free range animals, because they had a better life, right? We don't need to be brutal to the creatures. Is really the view here. Is you could eat animals, but you still got to be good to them, that sort of thing. And this actually becomes go back. Singer is a very popular advocate for vegetarianism, or at least, again, against factory farms and things like that. Again, it's, you can see some of this here, again in the notes, but, on eating animals, Singer argues, and I just want to read out this quote. The important question is not whether animal flesh could be produced without suffering, but whether the flesh we are considering buying was produced without suffering. So that's the view here, right? You need to know what you're buying when you're a consumer, because your consumer choices really do have an impact in the world, right? Unless we can be confident that it was, that it is wrong to sacrifice important interests of the animal just because of our own interest here. So what he's arguing is you should go out of your way to avoid factory farm foods, or animals that were, in inhumane conditions, or, terrible conditions, and then which, killed without much care. Because there are more humane ways of slaughtering animals, right? Sometimes they're gassed, so it's less painless. It's less painful, near painless, other than, some of the other ways they could be killed, which I'm not going to get into all that. It's a little nasty, but these things matter. And what he's arguing is that you need to be aware of these, right? So you pray for, cruelty-free, free range, but you need to know this. You need to consider these things when you're going out there for it. So again, you can, to buy this. Again, there's more of this in the text and the video. So let's look at mill and rule, utilitarianism. Here's just some things to put in there. These are questions to consider. Whether or not it's a higher or lower pleasure. Does it matter if a lamb is consumed in a greasy spoon cafe or prepared by a world-renowned chef? And this is interesting because actually, if you go to Singer, one of his arguments is the Paris exception. So say you're a vegetarian, he would argue if you're in a very, high-end French restaurant in Paris, and you can cheat on your it's permissible to cheat on your vegetarian lifestyle, because of the situations there, right? So say if you're vegan, and you only have vegetarian options, it's okay to choose those options, in that circumstance there. But really should the moral acceptability of eating an animal turn on the way which it was prepared for consumption, right? And that's what we mean by greasy spoon cafe, or a diner or a high-end restaurant. Are animals worth less than humans because they cannot access higher pleasures, right? So they don't really have the differences in higher pleasures. So are they worth less morally in the world that humans are. And then, let's take the back factory farm. Would it banning factory farms be ruled out if universalized would lead to the greatest good for the greatest number? Maybe, maybe not. These things you would have to consider. So when you're looking at mill and rule utilitarianism for your paper, really consider these questions there. I would say start with these there. All right, we're gonna pick up in the next one, looking in the next video, lecture video 3, looking at Kantian ethics and virtue.